Time, like an ever-flowing stream, rolls swiftly on. But what about those it leaves behind? The Time Traveler by Spider Robinson. Read by Karl. Of course, we should have been expecting it. I guess the people at Callahan's read newspapers just like other folks. There had been a discotheque over on Jericho Turnpike hit 3 days earlier. But somehow, none of us was prepared for it when it came. Well, how were we to know? It's not that Callahan's place is so isolated from the world you can never expect it to be affected by the same things. God knows that most of the troubles of the world, old and new, come through the door of Callahan sooner or later. But they usually have a dollar bill in their fist, not a 45 automatic. Besides, he was such a shrimpy little guy. And on top of everything, it was Pun Day night. Pun Day night is a weekly attraction at Callahan's, if that's the word. Folks coming to the place for the first time on Tuesday evening have been known to flee screaming into the night, leaving whole pitchers of beer behind in their haste to be elsewhere. Then there's Sunday, see, and there's Monday, and then there's Pun Day. On that day, the boys began assembling around 7:30. After a time, people stop piddling around with drafts and start lining up pitchers. And Fast Eddie gets up from his beat-up upright piano and starts putting tables together. Everyone begins ever so casually jockeying for position, so important on Pun Day night. Here and there, the newer men can be heard warming up with one another, and the first groans are heard. Say, Fogarty, I hear tell Stacey Keach was engaged to the same girl 3 times. Every time the big day came due, she decided she couldn't stand him. Do tell. Yep. Then the late Harry Truman himself advised her, said, Gal, if you can't stand the Keach, get out of the hitchin'. Another 3 or 4 glasses hit the fireplace. Of course, the real riggers, the old-timers, simply sit and drink their beer and conserve their wit. They add little to the scattered welter of glass that grows in the fireplace, though the toasts, when they make them, can get pretty flashy. Long about 11, Doc Webster comes waddling in from his rounds and the place hushes up. The Doc suffers his top-coated bag to be taken from him, collects a beer mag full of Peter Dawson's from Callahan, takes his place at the head of the assembled table like a liner coming into port. Then, folding his fingers over his great belly, he addresses the group. What is the topic? At that point, the fate of the evening hangs in the balance. Maybe you'll get a good topic, maybe you won't. The only way to explain what I mean is by example. Fast Eddie, says Callahan, how about a little inspirational music? That would bring the problem into scale, says Doc Webster, and the battle is joined. I've already noted that, came the hasty riposte from Shorty Steinmetz, and over his right long drink McGonagall snorts. You've cleft me in twain, he accuses. Tommy Jansen advises them to take a rest, and by the time that Callahan can point out, this ain't a music hall, it's a bar, they're off and running. Once a topic is established, it goes in rotation clockwise from Doc Webster. If you can't supply a sticker when your hour comes up, you're out. At 1 o'clock in the morning, it's usually a tight contest between the real pros. All of them acutely worried that anyone's still on the list by closing gets his night's tab erased. It's become a point of honor to drink a good deal on Monday night to show how confident you are. When I first noticed this and asked Callahan whose idea Pundy had been in the first place, he couldn't remember. One smart fellow, that Callahan. That one night in particular had used up an awful lot of alcohol and one hell of a lot of spiritual fortitude. The topic was one of those naturals that can be milked for hours. Electricity. It was about 1:15 that the trouble started. By this point in the harrowing evening, the competition was down to the Doc, Noah Gonzalez, and me. I was feeling decidedly punchy. Feeling this is going to be a good round for me, the Doc mused, and sent a few ounces of scotch past an angelic smile. You've galvanized us all once again, Doc, said Noah immediately. Sock it to me, I agreed enthusiastically. The Doc made a face, no great feat considering what he had to work with, and glared at me. Why are you debasing this contest with slang, he intoned. Oh, I don't know, conceded Noah. It seems like an acceptable current usage to me. You see, Doc, I said desperately, beginning to feel the strain now. Noah and I seem to be in agreement. But Doc Webster wasn't looking at me. He wasn't even looking in my direction. He was staring physically over Noah's right shoulder. I regret to inform you all, he said with the utmost calm, that the gentleman at the bar is not backing a lightning rod. About 30 heads swung around at once, and sure enough, It was the guy in front of the bar with a .45 automatic in his hand, and Callahan was staring equably into the medicine end. He was holding on a salt shaker in his huge horny fist. "What's that for?" the gunman demanded. "Might as well salt that thing, son. You're about to eat it." Now, your run-of-the-mill stick-up artist would react to a line like that by waving the rod around a little, even picking off the odd bottle behind the bar. This fellow just looked more depressed. Didn't look like a stick-up artist if it came to that. I would have taken for an insurance salesman down in his luck. He was short, slight, and balding, and his cold-rimmed glasses pinched cruelly at his nose. His features were utterly nondescript, a Walter Mitty caricature of despair, and I couldn't remember if some of our most notable assassins had been Walter Mitty types. Then I saw Fast Eddie over at the piano slide his hand down to his boot for the little blackjack he carries for disease. I began trying to remember if my insurance was paid up. The scrawny gunman locked eyes with Callahan, holding the cannon steady as a rock, and Callahan smiled. "Want a drink to wash it down with?" he asked. The guy with the gun ran out of determination all at once and lowered the piece, looking around him vaguely. Callahan pointed to the fireplace, and the guy nodded thanks. The gun described a lazy arc and landed a pile of glass with a sound like chains rattling in a pocket. You might have almost thought the gun had shattered the window that kept out a storm, but the whooshing sound that followed was really only the noise of a couple dozen guys all exhaling at the same time. Fast Eddie's hand slid back up his leg, and Callahan said softly, "You forgot the toast, friend." I expected that to confuse the guy, but it seemed he knew something about Callahan's place after all, because he just nodded and made his toast. To progress. I could see people all up and down the bar firing up their guessers, but nobody opened his trap. Wait to see if the guy felt like telling us what his beef with progress was. When you understand that you will have gone a long way towards understanding what Callahan's place is all about. I'm sure anywhere else folks figure a man who just waved a gun around owed an explanation, if not a few teeth. We just sat there looking non-committal and hoping he'd let it out. He did. I mean, progress is something with no pity and no purpose. It just happens. Chews up all you ever knew and spits out things you can't understand. The only value it seems to have is to make a few people a lot more money. What the hell is the sense of progress anyway? Keeps the dust off you, said Slippery Joe Mazer seriously. Now Joe, as you know, has 2 wives, and there sure as hell ain't no dust on him. I suppose you're right, said the clerical-looking burglar, but I'd surely appreciate a little dust just in a moment. I was heap deep in it for years, and I didn't know how well off I was. Well, take this to cut it with, said Callahan, and held out a gin and gin. As he handed it over, his other hand came up from behind the bar with a sawed-off shotgun in it. "I'll be damned," said Callahan, noting it for the first time. "Forgot I had that in my hand." Put it back onto the bar, and the balding bandit swallowed. "Now then, brother, pull up a chair and tell us your name, and if you got troubles I've never heard before, I'll give you the case of your choice. Make it I.W. Harper." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Harper." "Oh!" said Doc Webster, the last rising syllable occasioned by long drinks from conical-sized knives having come down hard on the Doc's instep. Pretty quick in the update, that long drink. "My name is Hoffman," the man said, picking up the drink. "Thomas Hoffman. I'm a..." Took a long pull. "That is, I used to be a minister." "And then God went and died, and now what the hell do you do? Is that it?" asked Long Drink with genuine sympathy. "Something like that," Hoffman agreed. "He died of malaria in a stinking little cell in a stinking little town in a stinking little banana republic called Pasala, and his name was Mary." Ice cubes clicked against his teeth. "Your wife?" asked Callahan after a while. "Yes, my wife." "No one dies of malaria anymore, did you know that? I mean, they looked at one years ago." "How did it happen?" Doc asked gently, and Callahan refilled glasses all around as the time traveler told us his story. "Mary and I," he said, "had a special game we played between ourselves. Oh, all couples play the same game, I suppose. We knew we were doing it, and we never cheated. You see, as many of you are no doubt aware, it's often difficult for a man and a woman to agree. Sustained audience demonstration signifying a hearty agreement. Even a minister and his wife. Almost any given course of action will have 2 sides. She wants to spend Sunday driving in the country, and he wants to spend it watching the football people sell razor blades. How was the dilemma resolved? Often by histrionics at 10 paces. She will emote furiously on the joys of a country drive. Entering rapture, she portrays the heart-stripping beauty to be found along Route 25A at this time of year. He, in turn, will roll his eyes and saw his hands. He attempts to convey through the wholly inadequate vocabulary of word and gesture how crucial this particular game is to both the history of football and the scheme of things. The winner gets, in lieu of an Oscar, his or her own way. It's a fairly reasonable system, based on the theory that pitch your performance is a function of how important the goal is to you. Recognize you're being outacted, you realize how important this one is to your spouse, and you acquiesce. The not cheating comes right there, in not hamming it up just enough just to be the winner, unless rarely that's the real issue, and admitting you've been topped. That was why when Mary brought God into the argument, a highly unfair last-ditch gambit for a minister's wife, I gave in and agreed we would spend my vacation visiting her sister Corinne. I'd give up a congregation over in Sayville, not very far from here. Frankly, Mary and I had all the Long Island we can take. We hadn't had even any plans. We intended to take a month's vacation, our first in several years, and then decide where to settle next. I wanted to spend a month with friends in Boulder, Colorado, and Mary wanted to visit her sister at a little fly-speck banana republic called Pasala. Crew was a nurse with the Peace Corps. We hadn't seen each other for 7 or 8 years. As I said, when the minister's wife begins to tell him about missionary zeal, it's time to capitulate. We said goodbye to my successor, Reverend Davis, promised to send a forwarding address as soon as we had one, and pushed off in the winter of 1963. We divided the voyage between discussing the growing pleasantness of a place called Vietnam and arguing over whether to ultimately settle on the west or east coast. We both gave uncertain, shaky performances, and the issue was tabled. Meeting Corinne for the first time, I was terribly struck by a dissimilarity of the sisters. Where Mary's hair was a rich, almost chocolate brown, Corinne's was a decidedly vivid red. While Mary's features were round, Corinne's were square with pronounced cheekbones. Where Mary was small and soft, Corinne was long and lithe. They were both very beautiful, but the only characteristic they shared was a profundity of faith that had nothing to do with heredity, and which quite as well with Corinne's fiery sense of purpose as with Mary's quiet certainty. Pasala turned out to be a perfect comic opera Central American country, presided over by a small-time tyrant named de la Vega. The hospital Corinne worked was located directly across from the Plaza de Palacio, from the palace which gave the square its name. De Valega had built himself an immense mausoleum of an imitation castle from which to rule. About the same time the hospital was built, which much the same sources of fund. Masao, you see, exports maize, sugarcane, a good deal of mahogany, and oil. As Corinne led us past the palace from the harbor, I commented on a number of heavily armed guards, groups of 5 of which had its own commissariat, who stood at every point of entry of the huge stone structure with the rifles at the ready. Corinne told us that revolution was brewing in the hills to the north, under the leadership of a man named Miranda, who with absurd inevitability had styled himself El Supremo. Murray and I roared with laughter at this final cliche and demanded to be shown someone taking a siesta. Without cracking a smile, Corinne led us around behind the hospital, where 4 mule-drawn carts were filled with khaki figures taking the siesta that never ends. You cannot deal with the problems of Pasala by changing the channel, Tom, she said soberly, and my horror was replaced by both a wave of guilt and a wistful, palpable vision of Boulder in the spring, which of course only made me feel more guilty. We dined that night in a miserable excuse for a cafe, but the food was tolerable and the music was quite good. Studying the Schumann, I've seen each other for years. It was not surprising that conversation flowed freely, and it kept coming back to El Supremo. I've heard it said his cause is just, Corinne told us over coffee, and I certainly can't argue otherwise. But the hospital was filled with the byproducts of his cause, and I'm sick of a revolution. Worse than ever since De Valaga had Miranda's brother shot. Good God, how'd it come about? I explained. Pablo Miranda used to run this cafe. Never had a thing to do with revolution. In fact, an awful lot of militant types used to drink in a much more villainous place on the other side of town, rather than embarrass Pablo with their presence. But after El Supremo blew up the armory, the dictator went a little crazy. A squad of guards came on the door and cut Pablo in half. Things have been accelerating ever since. People are afraid to travel by night, and the thugs are on double shifts. The rumors he's bringing trucks and cannon and a lot of ammunition from the United States for an expedition to clean out the hills, and the American embassy is awfully tight-lipped about it. What kind of ruler is he? Murray asked. Oh, an absolute thief. He robs the peons dry, rakes off all he can, and I'm sure the country would be better off if he'd never been born. But then there are some conflicting reports about El Supremo, too. Some say he's a bit of a butcher himself. And of course he's a communist, although God only knows what that means in Central America these days. I began to reply when we heard an ear-splitting crash from outside the cafe. Glasses danced off tables and shatters, and pandemonium broke loose. Three men scrambled to the door to see what had happened. As they reached the doorway, a machine gun spoke, pulling all three back into the cafe. They lay as they fell, and Murray began to scream. Tom, Kerman shouted over the din of gunfire and panicked certain people, "We've got to get to the hospital." "How do we get out?" I yelled back, rising and lifting Murray from her seat. "This way." Kerman led us rapidly through the jabbering crowd to a back exit, at which were gathered a good number of people too frightened to stick their heads out the door. I was inclined to agree with them, but Corinne simply walked out into the night. I glanced at Murray. She returned my gaze serenely, and we followed. There were no sudden barks of gunfire. The revelers were not really interested in anyone within the cafe. They were simply swinging anything that moved back on the plaza. As I helped Murray through the dark streets behind Corinne, tried to figure the way back to the hospital, could not recall where the back door of the cafe lay in relation to the door through which we had entered, but it seemed to me we would have to cross the plaza. I called to Corinne and she halted. As I came out to her, a volley of gunfire sounded off for our left, ending in a choking gurgle. "Considering what you told us about Miranda's egregious charm," I said, softly as the easy chest would let me, "hadn't I better get you two ladies to the American embassy? It's built like a fort." And it lay on this side of the plaza. "The hospital is very short-staffed, Tom," was all Corinne replied, with a total absence of facial expression or gesture. But I knew I could never equal a performance like that in a lifetime of trying. She spun on her heel and continued walking. Murray and I exchanged a long look. "She's a rank amateur," I said, shaking my head sadly. "She and I used to do summer stock together," she said, and followed Corinne's disappearing footsteps. Crossing the plaza turned out to be no more difficult than juggling poisoned darts. The few who shot at us were terrible marksmen. By the time it was necessary to cross open space, most of the fighting had centralized around the palace itself, and both sides were in general much too busy to waste good bullets on three civilians running in the opposite direction. But as we reached the hospital, I got under my soldier and saw trucks pulling around the corner of the building into the plaza, towing cannon behind them. As we raced through white corridors towards the emergency room, I heard the first reports, then nothing. The artillery provided by the U.S. State Department got off exactly 3 rounds. At that point, we later learned, a bearded man appeared on the palace balcony, overlooking the carnage in the square, and heaving something down onto the trampled sward. It was De Villega's head. Sensing the political climate with creditable speed, the uniformed cannoneers worked up a ragged cheer, and the revolution was over. But not for us. The maimed and wounded continued to be brought in throughout the night, giving my first real understanding of the term waking nightmare. So you have spent a couple hours collecting random limbs and organs for disposal. I would thank you not to use the term yourself. I'd rather naively assumed that most would be over when the battle stopped, but that turned out only to be the signal for the rape and plundering and settling of ancient grudges, which got a good deal uglier. Tried to get Murray to take a few hours of sleep, and he tried to get me to do the same. Although we both planned the performance of a lifetime, neither of us would concede defeat. It was about 3 the next afternoon when I heard the scream. I left one of De Villega's Reales to finish sewing up his own arm and sprinted down a crowded hall towards the surgery where Murray and Corinne had been for the past 13 hours. Sounding as though the scream had come first. It had. As I burst in the door, I saw Murray first, in the impersonally efficient grip of the largest man I'd ever seen in my life. Then I saw Corinne, struggling with a broad-backed revolutionary who was starting a uniformed patient on the operating table. The crossed bandoliers over his shoulders rose and fell as he strangled, as though he wanted there to be more to it than simply clenching his fingers. Corinne's flailing fists he noticed not at all. She was undoubtedly stronger than I, and wasted no time in tugging at the madman's shoulder. I picked up the nearest heavy object, a water pitcher, I believe, bounced off the back of his skull as hard as I could. He sighed and crumpled, and I whirled towards the giant to tell my Mary. You should not have done that, senor, he said in a deep, soft voice. The man in the bed, he once did a discourtesy to Pedro's wife. A grave discourtesy. Get out of this room at once, Corinne snapped in her best drill sergeant voice, strafing with rage. The big man shook his head sadly. I'm afraid not, senorita, he grumbled. Hands like shuffles tightened around Murray's biceps. She still did not utter a sound as I burst in. Senor, the giant said to me, you must please put down that pitcher. I will be forced to do your own wife a small discourtesy. I started. Ah, you see? I know who we are, and I would not wish to be discourteous to the wife of a man of God. The grill on the floor began to stir, and the huge man sighed. Afraid it's all over for you, Padre. Pedro, he is a most unreasonable man when he feels his honor is at stake. You hit him from behind. Corinne snorted and leaped at him, and I followed suit. Even together we could not budge him from his iron grip. We kept him too busy to hurt Mary, and I think he might eventually have prevailed. But then something large and heavy smashed into my left kidney, and I fell to the floor, gasping with pain. Then I saw Pedro, his tangled hair sick with blood on the side, step over me and reach for my Mary, and my soul died in my chest. Then the ears rang with a shot. I twisted about on the floor to see a tall man with a bristling mustache framed in the doorway, smoking automatic in his hands. He wore the shapeless khakis of the mountains, and there was an easy arrogance in the smile with which he regarded all of us. Behind me there was a thud as the body hit the floor. Half blind with pain, I contrived to roll over again, saw the pistol shot had taken off the top of Pedro's skull. There is that about martial law, said the man in the doorway with sardonic amusement. It is addictive. I finally managed to sit up, bracing myself against the large oxygen bottle. Who are you? I managed. The lean mustachioed man bowed low. Permit me to introduce myself, Padre. I am El Supremo Illustrious Senor Manuel Concepcion de Miranda, the current ruler of this republic. You, in turn, are the Reverend Hopman, and I must assume the charming lady there, release her at once, Diego, is your wife Mary. His excellent English bespoke an unusual degree of education, and his bearing was a studied claim to nobility. I began to believe we three might survive the afternoon for the first time in what seemed like hours. How do you all seem to know who we are? I asked. We all arrived yesterday. I don't think we've spoken to more than a handful of Pasalans. Yet that monster over there knew us, and I'm sure I remember him. I know all about the comings and goings of all American nationals in Pasala, he said smugly. Your country has been a source of much inconvenience to me, and I am a thorough man, as are my lieutenants. Diego was one. Pedro there was another. I cannot abide by a lieutenant who loses his head. He holstered his gun and entered the room, and I struggled to my feet with Mary's help. We'd come together, and she trembled violently. El Supremo looked about, failed to find a place to sit. He strode to the operating table, shoved the wounded and unconscious soldier off onto the hard floor quite casually, and sat down with his legs dangling over the edge. Corinne went for him, but before she covered 3 feet, the giant Diego intercepted her and lifted her clear off her feet. She struck at his face with balled fists, but he appeared not to notice. Diego, said Miranda with a grin, she does not seem to be content unless you have a woman in your hands. Why don't you take your young lady to my apartment to keep her there until I come, eh? Mary and I both cried out. My friends, said Miranda, still grinning, this is only justice. I had a woman, Rosa. She was heart of my heart. She was killed last night by an American cannon shell. Because of your country, I have no woman. Seems only fair that America give me a woman. I prefer an unmarried woman. I do not think the sister of a minister's wife will disappoint me. He laughed, a gay laugh that froze my blood. There is that about martial law, I heard myself say. It is selective. Explain, El Supremo barked. I believe the man on the floor over there was shot for attempted rape. Padre, said the tall revolutionary, drawing his gun again, in the absence of a lawful constitution for Posada, I must do the best I can myself. Occasionally I may be inconsistent, as I am now in sentencing you and your wife for 10 years imprisonment for disturbing the peace. You'll find there is this about martial law. It is effective. The next 20 minutes were the last 3 minutes that would spend for 10 years, and the last 3 minutes of Murray's life. I don't remember any of them. El Supremo marched us at gunpoint across the plaza to the palace, down many flights of stairs to the lowest of the 3 basement floors which made up the palace dungeons. There he locked us up personally in a 9 by 12 stone cell and left. We were there for 9 years, and I will not speak of those years. After Murray died, I was alone there for 11 months longer. I will not think of those months. I only say that in the first months, I thank God for giving Miranda the spark of humanity which caused him to put both Murray and me in the same cell. But soon, as I began to see the subtlety and horror of his true intent, I came to curse him with a black heart. 10 years inside a stone cell with no heat, no ventilation, and a pail for a toilet can do much to a marriage, and that Murray and I survived as long as we did was, I assure you, due only to the depths and strength of her character. And even she couldn't keep me from losing my faith in God. The minister was silent, staring into his glass as though he read there a strange and terrible secret which I could not quite believe. Stillness was absolute. No flames danced in the fireplace. I caught Doc Webster's eye, and he seemed to come back somewhere else with a start. What happened to Corinne? He asked hoarsely. Hoffman put down his glass suddenly and looked around at us incuriously. I've been told she died that night, he said conversationally, and I rather hope it's true. Miranda was an animal. Could the American Embassy do anything to get you out? Asked Longdrink quickly, and saw Callahan nod approval. The American Embassy, replied Hoffman bitterly, neither had the slightest knowledge of our incarceration nor cared to know. If anyone at all was aware of our presence in Pasala, he must have assumed we'd been killed in the uprising, and he undoubtedly heaved a great sigh when he realized he had no idea who to send condolences to. His words came like machine gun bullets now. We were listed in the prison records as Hidalgo, Damaso, and Maria subversives. That was quite good enough for the State Department, if they checked at all. El Supremo was quite an embarrassment to the United States. When they had him assassinated 2 years later, the puppet presidentes they installed were far too busy entertaining American oil executives to be bothered inspecting the palace's dungeons. The only human we saw for 9 years was a perpetually drunken jailer who brought such of our food as he didn't eat himself. I'll be there now, except that when Murray died, he broke off, got a fresh grip on himself, and continued. Someone noticed your body being removed for burial and became curious as to why Maria Hidalgo looks like an American. It was a year before I was released, owing to, political complications of an extremely delicate nature in the Middle East, I think they said. My God, I just realized what they meant. It sounded insane at the time, and I hadn't thought about it since. He laughed bitterly. Well, what do you know? Well, for the last 6 months I was there, I had Red Cross food and a blanket, so that was hunky-dory. Turned out it was a man from Baltimore, 4 cells down, part of the hospital staff, and he was released too. Murray hadn't died, we'd both still be there. The minister laughed again, gulped down the rest of his gin, and made a face. She was always getting me out of scrapes. More gin appeared before him. He gulped it noisily. You know, he said, with a dangerously high note in his voice, in all the 9 years the prayers never stopped rising from that filthy little cell. For the first 3 years we prayed that someone would depose El Supremo. For approximately the next 3 years, Murray prayed constantly in my faith in God would return. Then for about a year I prayed I don't know who that Murray would live. And after Maria took her, I took my life praying to anyone who would listen for a chance to kill El Supremo with my own hands. I mean to say, isn't that ironic? All that prayer, and none of it did the slightest good. El Supremo was dead all the time. Never seemed to get the belief back. And Mary... He broke off short and began to laugh softly. A laugh that got shriller and shriller until the glass burst in his hand. He then just sat and looked at his bleeding palm until Doc Webster came over and gently took it away from him. Well, at least this damn thing is disinfected, the doc grumbled. Don't ever pull that with an empty glass. Someone fenced his battered black bag and he began applying a dressing. Only about that point, everyone in the place got real interested in the floor and the ceiling. Sometimes even though there was an intelligent thing that could be said, it was slowly becoming necessary that somebody should say something. Callahan was right there. Reverend, he said, looking at thumb in his belt, that's a right side story. For an awful lot of blues, and I can't say I've ever heard worse. But what I would like to have explained to me now, if you follow me, is how the hell does all this bring you to my joint with a heater in your fist? There was steel in his voice, and the minister looked up sharply, guilt replacing the agony on his features. Bravo, Callahan, I thought. See, I knew what the preacher couldn't. When his anger in Callahan's voice has got to be that. It's just got to be theatrics. Because when Callahan is good and truly pissed off, he doesn't bother to talk at all. Little Mister was a while finding words. You see, he said finally, as the dog finished banishing his hand, it was 10 years. 10 years. I don't know if you can understand what I mean. I know it's just been 2 years since Murray died, it's not just that. But you see, she was all I know for such a long time, and now I don't know anything at all. You must understand, in all that time, we never saw a newspaper, or a magazine, or a TV broadcast. Never heard so much as a radio. We had utterly no communication with the outside world. We were as isolated as two human beings can be. Hell, said Tommy Jansen. Sounds like what I could use to straighten up my head once and for all. Straighten your head out, Hopman exploded. Now you know perfectly well what the boy means, Long Drink interceded. No one is asking to say those years weren't nightmares for you, but you're nearly nothing to write home about, to mother about for us. You missed a lot of trauma, a lot of bad times and trouble. Maybe in that at least you were better off. And most of us here probably wished you could get away from anything for a long spell, and you did it. What's wrong with isolation? Nothing per se, Hopman said quietly. The problem is this, the world won't wait for you. You drop out for more than a short time, and brother, the world goes on without you. I begin, said Callahan slowly. I begin to see what you mean. You don't even begin, Hopman said flatly. You can't. You're too close to it. The whole world turns upside down in 10 years, but you turn upside down with it. And so do you, it's right side up. Happens over days and weeks and months. Most people can adapt that fast. But I don't recognize the first thing about this world. I didn't live through it. Let me give all you good folk a history lesson. He got up, walked to the bar, and put it on his hand. Callahan put a glass of gin in it. He turned, faced us all, took a long swallow, and cleared his throat, but pedantically. Murray and I left for Passau in February of 1963, he said. I've since had occasion to supplement my own memories for references from the New York Times. You may find some of them interesting. On the first day of our departure, for instance, there have been a total of 33 Americans killed in Vietnam since the start of U.S. involvement. Not that anyone was aware of it. It wasn't until a few days after we left that Senator Manfield's study group issued a warning the Vietnam struggle was becoming an American war that cannot be justified by present U.S. security interests in the area. Why, the godforsaken place was costing us a whole $400 million a year. Of course, General O'Donnell replied the next day that all those combat pilots among the advisors were there to train the Vietnamese, not to take part in the war themselves. A lot happened since then, hasn't it? How about another area, my friends? In November 1962, Dean Monroe of Harvard University warned undergraduates against the use of the stimulant LSD that depresses the mind, and censored Professor Albert Leary from promoting its use. Dr. Leary replied that hysteria can only hamper research and points to the absence of any evidence that the drug was harmful. In California, meanwhile, authorities were sending a similar warning note concerning a newly discovered drug which was beginning to appear in the streets. It was called methadone. The New American Church was still fighting unsuccessfully for the right to continue using peyote in its religious ceremonies, a practice which predated white settlement of America. Henry Anslinger had just retired as head of the federal narcotics agency, and there was some talk of controlling the sale of airplane glue to those under 18. Incidentally, while Larry and Albert, who I understand calls himself Ram Dass lately, found little difficulty in preserving their academic autonomy, others were not so lucky. Professor Koch was fired from Illinois University for daring to suggest in print that premarital sexual relations should in some cases be condoned. By the time Murray and I got in the boat, the efforts of the American University Professors Association to have him reinstated had been entirely fruitless. Months after he left, the Illinois State Court declined to intervene. Whatever Masters and Johnson were doing, they weren't talking about it. The sexual revolution was still being vigorously, and apparently successfully, ignored. Hard to remember back 10 years, isn't it? How about the space race? The latest news I've heard put us quite a few moon landings and space probes ahead of the Russians. Most people I've spoken to seem to assume it was always that way. America's felt pretty cocky about the big deep for quite a while now. Do you know that by February of '63, the Russian Vostok series had racked up 130 orbits, a total of 192 hours in space, while the US had a total of 12 orbits in 20 hours? A couple of years earlier, President Kennedy, remember him, had publicly committed to putting a man on the moon in the next decade, and he was widely pronounced deranged. 8 years later, Armstrong took the first lunar walk, and the nation yawned. You people are so damn blasé about it all. I could go on for hours. When I dropped out, assassination had not yet become commonplace. JFK had not yet been canonized, and RFK was just arguing his first case in any court as Attorney General of the United States. Cinerama was just getting started. Halo's the wave of the future, and the New York World's Fair had not yet opened. 2 months after we left, Cleopatra premiered, and 20th Century Fox stock dropped $2 a share. Hoffman broke off, began to laugh hysterically. Callahan reached across the bar and gripped his shoulder with a hand like a stake, but the minister shook his head. I'm all right, he managed, choking with laughter. Just I haven't told you the funniest joke of all. You know, he killed me the time when I didn't dare break up. You see, when I was finally released, they brought me directly to Washington, where some very cheerless men wanted to ask me a number of questions and help me memorize what had officially happened. But first they wanted to compensate me for my troubles with the thrill of a lifetime. I was conveyed before the President of the United States for a hearty handclasp, and I thought I was going to faint from holding in the laughter. I hadn't thought to ask who the President was, you see. It didn't seem especially important. After all I'd been through, I didn't expect I'd recognize the name. But when Richard Nixon held out his hand, I thought I'd die. See, 3 months before I left, Nixon lost the race for governor of California, and assured the press with tears in his eyes that they wouldn't have Dick Nixon to kick around anymore. This time the whole place broke up. Doc Lefter almost lost his tonsils trying to whoop and swallow at the same time. Fast Eddie tried to swing into "Don't make promises you can't keep," but he was laughing so hard he couldn't find the keys, and a barrage of glasses hit the fireplace from all around the room. Which was fine for catharsis, but as the laughter trailed off, we realized this catharsis was not enough for Tom Hopman. As his passionate words sank in, it began to dawn on all of us we'd adapted to an awful lot in 10 years. Some crazy way this competition with a man who was forced to try and swallow a whole new world at one gulp seemed to drive home to all of us just how imperfectly we had all adapted ourselves. You know, Long Drink drawled in the sudden silence, the little man has a point. Been a lot going on lately. It occurs to me, Tommy Johnson said softly, that 10 years ago I had never heard the word heroin, and he gulped at his beer. 10 years ago, Doc Lefter mused, I thought that heart transplants were the province of science fiction writers. 10 years ago, Slippery Joe breathed wistfully, I was single. I was thinking that 10 years ago I wore a crew cut and listening to Jerry Lewis and Fats Domino. Christ, I said, as the apostle boasted over me, nobody ever heard the Beatles in 1963. The whole electric sound, respectability of rock and its permutation of all other forms of pop music had taken place while Hoffman was rotting in a cell, listening to his fingernails growing. What must the music of today sound like to him? Jim McQueen of the Beatles had pointed out in the late 60s that the Beatles had signaled to change the very sound of music. He compared pre-Beatles music to the bass roar of a propeller plane and the ensuing post-Beatles rock to the metallic whine of a jet engine. From what I could hear on the radio, it seemed we were already up to the subsonic shrieking of a rocket exhaust, and Hoffman was getting all at once. From Paul Anka to Alice Cooper in one jump. Why, the sartorial and the tonsorial changes alone were enough to boggle the mind. We all stared at him, thinking we understood. But he looked all around us and shook his head and took another drink. No, he said, you still don't understand. What you're all just beginning to see is what I would, for a science fiction writer, call the time traveler's dilemma. Future shock, I believe they're calling it now. But my problem was the time traveler's second dilemma, transplant shock. You see, you're all time travelers too, traveling through time at a rate of 1 second per second. In the past few minutes, you've all been made acutely aware of just how much time you've passed through in the last 10 years, and it's made you think. But I've traveled 10 years all at once, and I don't have your advantages. Strange as this particular time is to you, you have roots woven in its fabric. You have a place in it, however tenuous. Most of all, you have a purpose. Don't you understand? I was a minister. I was charged with responsibility for the spiritual development of other human beings. I was trained to help them live moral lives, to make right choices and difficult decisions, and to comfort them when they needed comfort. And now I don't even begin to grasp their problems, let alone the new tools that people like me have been jury-rigging over the past 10 years to help them. Well, I went to a fellow cleric for advice, and he offered me a marijuana cigarette. I called an old acquaintance of mine, a Catholic priest, and his wife answered the phone. This whole Watergate revelation is no surprise to anyone who's lived in Panama in '63. It's been a long time since I believed Uncle Sam was a virgin, but I used to be in the minority. Gentlemen, how can I function as a minister when I can't even begin to comprehend every single one of the moral issues of the year? When I can't because I haven't lived through the events that gave them birth. Finished off his gin, left the glass on the table, and began tracing designs in the moisture that left there. Looked for other work. Looked here for other work for nearly 6 months now. Any of you here out of work? This is a shame saying that, because it caused me to pitch a perfectly good glass of Bushmills into the fireplace. Hopman nodded and turned to the red-haired mountain behind the bar. And that, Mr. Callahan, he said quietly, is long and short of why you find me in your establishment with a pistol I bought in an alleyway from a young man with more hair than Murray used to have. I simply don't know what else to do. He looked around at all of us. And no, that didn't work either. There's only one thing I can do. He heaved a great sigh and his shoulders twitched. Wonder if I get to see Murray again. Now, we're a reasonably bright bunch of Callahans, with some notable exceptions. Nobody in the room figured the one thing Hupman had left to do was start up a chain litter. But at the same time, we're a humane bunch, with a fanatical concern for individual liberty, so we couldn't do any of the conventional things, like try to talk him out of it, or call the police, or have him fitted for the jacket that's all sleeves. Truth to tell, if one of us two of us had agreed with him and he had no alternative, we were pretty shaken by the story, is all I can say in our defense. Because if we just sat there and stared at him and felt helpless, silence became a tangible thing that throbbed in your temples and made your eyes sting. And then Callahan cleared his throat. To be or not to be, he claimed in a voice like a foghorn. Is that the question? Like I said, we're a bright bunch, but it took us a second. By the time I got, Callahan had already lumbered out from behind the bar, swept the pitcher and 3 glasses to the floor, and wrapped the tablecloth around him like a toga. Doc Webster was grinning openly. Listen, you goddamn fathead, Callahan declaimed in the hokey, Stintonian terms of a Shakespearean ham. "'Tis damn little nobler to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune than to take arms against the sea of troubles and buy a posy and let 'em lick ya." His eyes rolled, his huge hands stalled the air as he postured and orated. Hopman stared blankly, his mouth open. Doc Buster heaved himself onto a chair, harumphed noisily, and struck a pose. "Do not go gentle with the night, good night," he began passionately. Suddenly, Callahan's place became a madhouse, something like a theater might be if actors tuned up as cacophonously as do orchestras. Everyone suddenly became the ghost of Barrymore, authority had, and the air filled with praises of life and courage delivered in the most impassioned, histrionic manner. I unpacked my old guitar and joined fast study in a rousing chorus of "Pack Up Your Sorrows." I guess among us all we made a hell of a racket. All right, Callahan bellowed after a few minutes of pandemonium. Reckon that ought to do, gents. I think we took the Oscar. He turned to Hopman and tossed the tablecloth on the floor. "Well, Reverend," he ground, "can you top that performance?" The little minister looked at him for a long spell, and he began to laugh and laugh. A different kind of laugh he'd heard from him before, had no ragged edges and no despair in it. It was a full, deep belly laugh. Instead of grinning on nerves like a knife on piano wire, it made us feel proud and warm and relieved. Kind of a tribute to our act. "Gentlemen," he said finally, clapping his hands, feebly still chuckling, "I concede. I've been outacted fair and square. Wouldn't try to compete with a performance like that." Then at once he sobered and looked at all of us. I I didn't know people like you existed in this world. I think I can make it now. I'll find some kind of work. Somebody else knows how tough it is, and it's all right. Corner of his mouth looked with a happy smile, with a flood of tears on the way down. Thank you, my friends. Thank you. Any time, said Callahan, and meant it. And then the door banged inevitably open. We spun around to see a young black kid, chest heaving, framed in the doorway with a 38 police in his hand. Everybody be quiet, nobody gonna get hurt, he said shrilly and stepped inside. Caroline seemed to swell around the soldiers, but he didn't move. Everybody was frozen, thinking for the second time that night that we should have been expecting it. Out of all of us, only Hopman refused to be numbed by a shock anymore. Only Hopman kept his head, and only Hopman remembered. It all happened very quickly then, as it had to happen. Callahan's shotgun was behind the bar, out of reach, and Fast Eddie had been caught with both hands in sight. The minister caught Doc Webster's eye, and they exchanged a meaningful glance in a room that I didn't understand. And then the doc cleared his throat. "Excuse me, young man," he began, and the black kid turned to tell him to shut up, and behind him, Hopman sprang from his chair headlong across the room and head first towards the fireplace. He landed on his stomach, and his hands plowed straight into the welter of broken glass. As he wrenched over on his back, his right hand came up with that big 45 in it, and the kid was still turning to see what the noise behind him was. They froze that way for a long moment. Hopman sprawled in the fireplace, the kid by the bar, and two gun muzzles staring obliquely across the room at each other. The Callahan spoke. "You'll hurt him with a 38, son, but he'll kill you with a 45. The kid froze, his eyes darting in the room. The flint scuffed him and bolted for the door with a noise like a cross between a sneeze and a sob. Nobody got in his way. And then Callahan spoke up again. "Easy, Tom," he said conversationally. "Moral lines never change. Only social ones. One thing I'll say for the boys at Callahan's, they can keep a straight face." Nobody cracked a smile as Callahan fed the cops a perfectly hilarious yarn about how the minister had disarmed his thief with a revolver he had only that afternoon taken from a troubled young parishioner. Some of us had even argued against involving the police at all on general principles. I was one of them. But Callahan insisted he didn't want any guns in his joints, and nobody else really wanted them either. But what I was proudest of the boys was when the police asked for a description of the thief. None of us had given any thoughts to that, but Doc Webster was right in there, his dragon in the shower voice drowning out all others. "Description?" he boomed. "Hell, nobody was ever easier to describe. The guy was 6'4" with a hooked nose, blonde hair, blue eyes, a scar from his right ear to his chin, and he had one leg. Not one of us so much as blinked as the cop dutifully wrote that down. Perhaps that kid would have another chance. Tom Hopman, however, didn't come off so well in the aplomb department. So one of the cops was phoning in. Long Drink called out, "Hey Tom, one thing I don't understand. That can you had was in the fireplace for a good hour or so, and that hearth was pretty warm even when the fire's been out a while. How the hell come none of the cartridges went out?" Mr. looked puzzled. "Why, I have no idea. You suppose that..." But the second cop was making strangling sounds and waving the 45. Leslie found his voice. "You mean you didn't know?" We looked at him. He tossed the gun to Callahan, who one-handed easily, and the son looked startled. He hefted the gun, and his jaw dropped. "There's no clip in this gun," he said faintly. "Damn thing's unloaded." And Tom Hopman fainted dead away. By that time to recover from that one, Callahan decided that Doc and Noah and I were Monday night champions, helping ourselves to just one more free drink with Tom Hopman, but Doc came up with an idea. "Say, Mike," he called out, "think a bunch of savvy galoots like us could find Tom here some kind of job?" "Well, I'll tell you, Doc," said Callahan, scratching his neck. "We've given that some thought." He lit a cigar and regarded the minister with a professional eye. "Tom, do you want to think about tending bar?" "Huh? Well, yes, I do. Tended bar for a couple summers before I entered the ministry." "Well," Callahan drawled, "I ain't getting any younger. This all day and night stuff was okay for some of your age, but I'm pushing 50. Why, I hit a man last week and he got up on me. I mean to get myself a little part-time help, sort of distribute the load a little. The right honor to have a man of God serve my booze." Remember, a shock ran through the bar, an expression of awe at the honor being accorded to Tom Hopman. Looked around, having a sense to see it was up to us as much as it was to Callahan. Why the hell not? Roared Long Drink and the doc together, and the minister began to cry. Mr. Callahan, he said, I'd be glad to help you run this bar. At that point, a rising cheer went up, and about 24 glasses met above the newly relit blaze in the fireplace. Toast got proposed all at once, and the firecracker went off somewhere in the back of the room. The minister was lifted on a couple of free shoulders, and the most god-awful alley cat off-key chorus you ever heard assured him that he was indeed a jolly good fellow. Let's call for another drink, Callahan decreed. What'll it be, Tom? Well, the minister said diffidently, I've had an awful lot of gin. I haven't really gotten back into training yet. I think I better just have a horse's ass. Reverend, said Callahan, vastly chagrined. Whatever it is you're going to get in the house, because I never heard of it. All around the room, conversation chopped off in mid-sentence as the news was assimilated. The last time I remember when Callahan got taken for a drink was in 1968, when some joker in a pork pie hat asked for a Mother Superior. Turned out to be a martini with a prune in it. Callahan, by God, went out and bought a prune. Hatman blinked at the commotion he was causing and managed. Well, I won't set you back very much. It's just a ginger ale with a cherry in it. He paused, apparently embarrassed, and continued just a shade too diffidently. You see, they call it that because anyone should order one as a horse's ass. Of course, a dozen voices with him, and a shower of peanuts seemed to fall over the room. Tom Hopman had a half-full pitcher at the fireplace, and fast Eddie snatched out of the air with his right hand as his left picked up, You said it, not me, and F sharp. Hopman accepted his voice drink from Callahan, and he made it to his lips before he noticed a remarkably authentic-looking plastic fly, which Callahan had thoughtfully added to the prescription. The explosion was impressive, and I swear ginger ale came out of his ears. Seemed like a likely place to find a fly, said Callahan loudly. Somehow fast Eddie managed to heave the pitch at him without interrupting the song. Callahan fielded it deftly and took a long drink. That's what I like to see, he boomed, replacing a cigar in his teeth. A place that's merry. The end.